The great city of Valon stretched across the horizon like a crown of steel and glass. Towers of silver reached upward, their tops disappearing into the misty skies. Bridges of light connected the buildings, and airships glided between them like silent birds. From a distance, it was a beautiful sight, an empire proud of its power and wealth. But beauty was only for the free. For those in chains, the city was a cage. Lyra walked slowly through the marble halls of her master's palace. She wore a simple white robe that marked her status, property. Her head was slightly bowed, her steps light and silent. Every slave in the empire was trained to walk like this, unseen and unheard. Her masters demanded it. She had lived this way for as long as she could remember. Tasks, orders, and silence. She was told she was lucky to serve in the palace of one of the empire's great lords. But Lyra never felt lucky. Deep inside, there was always a quiet ache, a dream she dared not voice. The dream of freedom. That morning, whispers filled the palace halls. New visitors had arrived from a distant world, humans. Few in the empire had ever seen one. The empire's scribes claimed humans were stubborn, unpredictable, and strange. Lyra had no opinion. To her, visitors meant more work. She expected nothing more. But when she entered the grand hall carrying a tray of crystal cups, she froze. The humans stood near the throne, speaking to the imperial nobles. They were tall, dressed in dark uniforms that shone with polished metal badges. Their eyes were sharp, scanning every corner of the hall. Lyra noticed something strange about their gaze. It was different. Unlike her masters, they did not look at slaves as if they were invisible. One of them, a man with dark hair and stern eyes, glanced at her. For a heartbeat, their gazes met. Lyra looked away quickly, afraid of punishment. But that moment was enough to plant a seed of curiosity in her heart. The humans were introduced as part of a diplomatic mission. Their leader, Captain Aaron Holt, spoke firmly to the nobles, his voice carrying through the hall. Lyra could not understand every word, but she caught pieces of it. Words like rights, freedom, and dignity. Words she had never heard inside the palace walls. The nobles laughed at the humans' strange ideas. To them, slaves were tools, nothing more. They mocked the humans for caring about the weak. Lyra's heart beat faster as she listened. The more she heard, the stranger the humans seemed. Why would anyone speak for those who had no voice? Later that day, Lyra was ordered to deliver food to the guest quarters. She walked quietly with the tray, her mind heavy with questions. When she entered the human's chamber, she kept her eyes low as always, but Captain Holt noticed her again. "You don't need to bow," he said softly. His voice was not harsh, not commanding, only calm. Lyra froze. No master had ever told her such a thing. She dared to glance up, confused. The captain's gaze was steady, not cruel, not mocking. For the first time in her life, she felt like someone saw her, not as property but as a person. She whispered, "I must. It is the law." "The law is wrong," he replied. Those words echoed in her mind long after she left the room. That night, Lyra sat alone in her small chamber. The stars outside the palace windows seemed so far away, unreachable. She thought about the humans, about their strange ideas, and about the captain who had spoken to her like an equal. Her heart felt restless. For years she had buried her hope under layers of silence, but now a tiny flame had been lit. If the humans truly believed in freedom, could it mean that her dream was not impossible? The next day, she saw the humans again. They walked through the palace halls with guards following closely. Captain Holt glanced at her briefly, a silent recognition in his eyes. Lyra felt her chest tighten. She wanted to speak, but fear chained her tongue. Later, when she carried supplies to the gardens, she found herself alone for a moment. To her surprise, the captain appeared from the path ahead. He seemed to have been waiting. "I know you understand me," he said quietly. "Tell me your name." Lyra hesitated. No master had ever asked for her name before. To them, she was simply slave. Saying her name out loud felt dangerous, almost forbidden. Lyra, she whispered. The captain nodded. Lyra. A strong name. Listen to me. I don't know how long I'll be here, but I promise you, you deserve more than this life. You deserve freedom. Her heart raced. No one had ever spoken such words to her. She wanted to believe him, yet fear pulled her back. If anyone discovered this conversation, she would be punished severely. I cannot, she said, shaking her head. It is impossible. Nothing is impossible, he answered firmly. Not for humanity. Not for you. Before she could reply, the sound of footsteps echoed nearby. Guards were approaching. The captain turned and walked away as if nothing had happened, leaving her trembling in the garden. That night Lyra could not sleep. She repeated the words again and again in her mind. You deserve freedom. She stared at the stars outside her window. They no longer looked unreachable. Instead, they looked like a path, one that perhaps, just perhaps, she might walk someday. For the first time in her life, Lyra allowed herself to hope. The palace of Lord Vaylor was filled with tension. The humans' visit had stirred whispers among nobles, guards, and even slaves. Their strange ideas about freedom and dignity unsettled the empire's rulers. For centuries, their system had gone unchallenged. Now these humans came speaking of equality and respect, words that felt like fire in the halls of power. Lyra went about her duties, carrying trays and arranging rooms, but her mind was far away. She thought of the captain's words in the garden. You deserve freedom. The sentence replayed like music she had never heard before, both beautiful and dangerous. Whenever she passed the humans' chambers, her heart beat faster. She wondered if Captain Holt still thought of her. She wondered if he truly meant what he said. That evening, a grand banquet was held in the palace. Nobles filled the long hall, dressed in silks and jewels. Lyra moved silently among them, serving drinks and food. At the far end of the hall, the humans sat at a long table, their uniforms neat and polished. Captain Holt's expression was calm, but his eyes never stopped observing. Lord Vaylor raised his golden cup. To the strength of the Empire, he declared, and to our new friends, the humans. The nobles cheered, but Holt did not lift his cup immediately. Instead, he rose to speak. We thank you for your welcome, he began, his voice steady. But friends must speak the truth to each other, and the truth is this: your empire is built on chains. No society can be truly strong if it survives on the suffering of the weak. The hall went silent. Every noble stared at him in shock. To speak such words in front of Lord Vaylor was bold, dangerous even. Some nobles laughed nervously, others muttered angrily. Lord Vaylor's eyes narrowed. You speak as if you know better than us, Captain. Slavery is order. It is tradition. Without it, our empire would crumble. Then perhaps it should crumble, Holt replied coldly. A gasp spread across the hall. Lyra, standing with a tray in her hands, nearly dropped the cups. No one had ever dared to speak to Lord Vaylor that way. She felt both fear and wonder. The rest of the banquet was tense. Guards stood ready, hands on their weapons, yet the humans showed no fear. They ate calmly, as though challenging the Empire was nothing new to them. Later that night, Lyra was sent to deliver fresh water to the guest chambers. Her hands trembled as she knocked lightly on the human's door. When Holt opened it, she lowered her eyes, but he spoke softly. Lyra, he said, remembering her name. She stepped inside, placing the jug of water on the table. The room was simple, unlike the nobles' chambers. Maps and devices were spread across the desk, showing that the humans were busy planning something. You were brave tonight, Lyra whispered before she could stop herself. Holt studied her. You were listening? Yes, she admitted. But why? Why risk angering the Empire? Because it is wrong, Holt said firmly. Because no one should live in chains. Not you, not anyone. Lyra's eyes filled with uncertainty. You do not understand. The Empire is too strong. They would crush anyone who stood against them. The captain leaned closer. his voice low. Lyra, humanity has faced impossible odds before. We survived. Worlds that tried to kill us, storms that tore apart our cities, and enemies that thought we were weak. But humans don't surrender. We fight. And if we fight for ourselves, why not for others too? She had no answer. His words shook something deep inside her. She had lived so long believing nothing could change. But here was a man who believed change was not only possible, but necessary. For the first time, Lyra allowed herself to share a piece of her heart. I was taken as a child, she whispered. I do not remember freedom. I do not even know what it feels like. Sometimes I dream of walking under the stars with no orders, no chains. But when I wake, I tell myself such dreams are foolish. They are not foolish, Holt said softly. They are a promise of what could be. Hold on to them, Lyra. One day we will make them real. Her throat tightened. No one had ever spoken to her like this. For a moment she almost believed him. Suddenly a knock thundered at the door. Lyra froze in fear. Holt motioned her to stay calm and opened the door. A guard stood there, suspicious eyes scanning the room. Is everything in order? The guard asked. Holt smiled politely. Perfectly in order. We were just discussing tomorrow's meeting. The guard's eyes lingered on Lyra. Why is the slave still here? She was delivering water, Holt replied smoothly. I asked her to remain until we finished. The guard grunted and finally left. Lyra let out the breath she had been holding. Holt's eyes hardened. You must be careful, he warned her. If they suspect you are speaking with me, they will punish you. Lyra nodded. She knew the danger, yet she also knew something else. She could not ignore the spark he had lit inside her. The following days grew more tense. The humans continued their talks with the nobles, but each meeting ended in anger. The Empire refused to listen. To them, slavery was not evil, but natural. Lyra noticed whispers spreading among the slaves. They had seen the humans, heard fragments of their words, and something was changing. Small, fragile hope began to stir where before there had only been silence. One afternoon, while delivering scrolls to the library, Lyra found Holt waiting there. He handed her a small piece of metal no bigger than her palm. This is a communicator, he explained. If you ever find yourself in danger, press the symbol in the center. I will hear you. Her fingers trembled as she took it. She had never owned anything before, not even clothes that were truly hers. To be given this felt like being given a piece of the stars themselves. Why? She asked softly. Why do you care for me? Holt looked at her with steady eyes. Because no one else does. Because if we humans don't stand up for what's right, then what makes us any different from those who enslave? Lyra clutched the communicator to her chest. She wanted to believe in him, but fear still wrapped around her heart. That night, she looked at the stars once again. For the first time, they did not seem like cold, distant lights. They seemed like doors waiting to be opened. She whispered to herself, Maybe freedom is not impossible. And though her voice was quiet, the spark had already been lit. The city of Valon glittered like a jewel under the night sky, but the streets below the shining towers were restless. Whispers of unrest spread among the people. Merchants complained about heavy taxes, slaves murmured about strange ideas of freedom, and guards patrolled with tighter grips on their weapons. At the center of it all, the human's presence was like a spark in dry grass. Every word Captain Holt spoke in defiance of slavery spread quickly, carried in secret by slaves who listened. To the nobles, he was an annoyance. To the slaves, he was a voice of hope. Lyra felt this change most of all. For years, her life had been routine and silent. Now, every day felt heavy with possibility. She carried the small communicator Holt had given her, hidden in the folds of her robe. She touched it often, as if to remind herself it was real. But the Empire had also noticed the tension. Lord Vaylor grew more suspicious of the humans, and his guards watched Lyra more closely. The danger grew with each passing day. Then, everything changed. The incident began during a public gathering in the Grand Plaza. Nobles stood on raised platforms, delivering speeches about the Empire's strength. Hundreds of citizens gathered to listen, with slaves moving silently among them, carrying food and banners. Lyra was among them, her arms aching from holding a heavy silver tray. The humans were present too, standing together as honored guests. Holt's expression was calm, but his eyes scanned the crowd. Suddenly, a voice shouted from among the slaves, "We are not tools. We are not property." Gasps filled the plaza. The guards rushed to seize the speaker, a young male slave, but the moment could not be undone. The words hung in the air, dangerous and powerful. The nobles roared in anger. The guards struck the young slave to silence him, but the crowd was already restless. Murmurs spread quickly, and the tension exploded into chaos. Some citizens protested the brutality, slaves cried out, and others began to push against the guards. In the confusion, Holt saw his chance. He moved toward Lyra, his voice urgent. "Now, we leave tonight." Lyra's heart pounded. Fear rushed through her, but so did hope. She nodded, unable to speak. That night, the city was in turmoil. Fires burned in the lower districts, and patrols filled the streets. The riot had not been planned, but it spread like wildfire. In the shadows of the palace gardens, Holt found Lyra waiting. She trembled, clutching the communicator. "Are you certain?" she whispered. "If we wait, you will be trapped forever," Holt answered. "Come. Trust me." For a moment, she hesitated. Leaving meant risking everything: her life, her fragile safety, even the little world she knew. But then she remembered her dreams of walking under the stars as a free woman. She stepped forward. "I trust you." Together, they moved quickly through the palace corridors. Holt led the way, guiding her past guards and checkpoints. He seemed to know every turn, every shadow. Lyra's heart raced, but her steps grew steadier. For the first time, she was not walking as property. She was walking toward freedom. They reached a service tunnel beneath the palace. The air was damp and filled with the smell of stone and oil. Holt used a small device to unlock the gate. Beyond it, the tunnel led into the city, but before they could slip inside, a shout echoed behind them. "Stop!" Guards rushed forward, weapons drawn. Lyra froze in terror, but Holt pulled her behind him. He stood firm, his eyes hard. "Run when I tell you," he said quickly. The guards advanced. Holt moved with surprising speed, disarming one, with a swift strike and knocking another to the ground. Lyra watched in shock. Humans fought differently, not with cruelty, but with precision and determination. "Now, Lyra, go!" Holt shouted. She forced her legs to move, dashing into the tunnel. Holt followed close behind, the sounds of pursuit echoing in the distance. They ran through the darkness, the path twisting like a maze. Lyra's lungs burned, but she did not stop. Every step carried her farther from chains. At last, they emerged into the lower streets of Veillon. Fires flickered in the distance, and the air smelled of smoke. Crowds pushed against patrols, shouting and protesting. The chaos hid their movements, but it also made escape dangerous. "This way," Holt urged, guiding her through the narrow alleys. They slipped past groups of guards, ducked beneath archways, and crossed bridges lit by lanterns. Lyra's heart beat like a drum. Every shadow felt like danger, every noise like a trap. Yet Holt's presence gave her courage. At one point, they had to pause as a patrol marched by. Lyra pressed against the wall, trembling. Holt leaned close and whispered, "Breathe. You are stronger than you think." She met his eyes. For a moment, the noise of the city faded, and all she saw was his steady confidence. She nodded, gathering her courage. Their path led them to the outskirts of the city, where the human ship waited in a hidden landing bay. The sleek vessel glowed faintly under the moonlight, guarded by a small group of human soldiers. Lyra's breath caught. She had never seen such a craft up close before. It looked alive, a symbol of everything beyond her small world. But just as they neared the ship, more guards appeared, blocking the path. Lord Vaylor himself stood among them, his robe shining with gold. His voice thundered across the night. "Did you think you could steal what is mine, human?" Lyra froze in terror. Holt stepped forward, standing between her and the Lord. His voice was calm but filled with iron. "She is not yours. She is free." The Lord sneered. "Slaves cannot be free. She belongs to the Empire." "Not anymore," Holt replied. The standoff lasted only a heartbeat before the guards charged. The human soldiers fired precise shots, forcing the enemy back. Holt grabbed Lyra's hand. "Run!" They sprinted toward the ship, the battle raging behind them. Lyra's legs felt weak, but she pushed forward, her hand locked tightly in Holt's. Together they reached the ramp. As they stepped inside, the ship's engines roared to life. The ramp closed, sealing them in safety. Outside, the city grew, smaller as the ship lifted into the sky. Lyra collapsed onto the floor, gasping for breath. For a long moment she could not speak. Then she looked up at Holt, her eyes wide. I am really free?" He smiled faintly, though his voice was steady. "Yes, Lyra. You are free now." Tears filled her eyes. For the first time in her life, the chains around her heart had broken. She was no longer a slave. She was Lyra, and the stars awaited her. The stars stretched endlessly outside the window of the human ship. They glowed like tiny fires scattered across the black ocean of space. Lyra sat quietly, staring at them, unable to believe what had happened. For the first time in her life, there were no walls around her, no guards, no orders. Only freedom. Yet with freedom came uncertainty. She sat at the edge of the chamber given to her. The room was small compared to the palace halls, but it was hers. A bed, a desk, and a window to the stars. Such simple things felt overwhelming. She had never owned anything, never been given a space of her own. Captain Holt entered quietly. "How are you holding up?" he asked. Lyra turned, unsure how to answer. Her voice shook. I don't know. It feels like a dream. I keep waiting for someone to chain me again." Holt shook his head firmly. "No one here will chain you. Not ever again." His words steadied her. She nodded slowly, though her heart was still unsure. The next morning, Lyra walked through the corridors of the ship. Human crew members passed her, some nodding politely, others smiling warmly. None of them looked at her as property. To them, she was just another person. At first, it made her uncomfortable. She didn't know how to respond. She kept her eyes low, as she had always been taught, but one of the crew, a young engineer named Sarah, gently lifted Lyra's chin. "You don't need to bow," Sarah said kindly. "Here, we stand side by side." The words struck Lyra deeply. She tried to smile, though it felt strange on her face. Later that day, Holt brought her to the dining hall. The room was filled with chatter as the crew ate and laughed together. Lyra hesitated at the doorway, her hands trembling. She had never shared a table with free people before. Holt guided her to a seat. "Sit," he said softly. She sat, nervous under the crew's curious eyes. But instead of mocking her, they welcomed her. They offered food, asked her questions, and treated her as an equal. Lyra's fear slowly faded as she tasted food cooked with care, not for a master but for everyone. "Do you like it?" Sarah asked, smiling. Lyra nodded quickly. "It is warm," she said. The word felt strange, but it was the only way she could describe the comfort she felt. Days passed and Lyra began to learn the rhythm of life aboard the ship. She watched the crew as they worked, fixing engines, charting stars, and navigating through dangerous asteroid fields. Everything was new to her, every sound and sight a wonder. But she also struggled. Sometimes she woke at night, trembling with the memory of chains. Sometimes she felt unworthy of the kindness she received. She told Holt once, "I do not belong here. I am only a slave who was taken." Holt looked at her firmly. "You are not a slave, Lyra. Not anymore. You belong wherever you choose to stand." His words stayed with her. Slowly, she began to discover her own strengths. She had lived in the palace her whole life, observing the ways of nobles, guards, and officials. She remembered maps, secret passages, and political rivalries. When Holt and his officers planned strategies against the Empire, she shared what she knew. At first, she feared they would laugh at her, but instead they listened carefully. Holt even said, "Your knowledge may save lives, Lyra. You are already part of this crew." Her chest warmed at his words. She had never felt useful before, only used. Now she was helping, truly helping. One evening. As the ship drifted quietly through space, Lyra stood at the observation deck. The stars reflected in her wide eyes. She whispered almost to herself, "So many worlds, all waiting." Holt approached, his footsteps soft. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Lyra nodded. "I used to think the stars were unreachable. Now I am here, among them. It feels unreal." "They've always been waiting for you," Holt said. "Now you can choose where to go." She turned to him, her voice soft. "Why do you care so much?" "You could have left me behind." His answer was simple. "Because it was the right thing to do. And because every person deserves a chance to be free." Lyra's throat tightened. She looked back at the stars, but inside her heart, something new stirred. Trust. And perhaps something deeper she did not yet understand. The peace did not last long. The Empire had not forgotten. Messages arrived demanding Lyra's return. Lord Vaylor declared she was stolen property. The humans refused. Lyra stood silently as Holt and his officers argued over tactics. "They will come for us," one said. "The Empire won't let this go." Holt's jaw tightened. "Then we stand ready. Humanity does not bow to tyrants." Lyra listened, fear curling in her chest. Once again, she felt like the center of danger. "Perhaps I should go back," she whispered. The room fell silent. Holt turned to her, his eyes sharp. "No, don't ever say that. You are free, Lyra. They cannot take that from you unless you let them." She lowered her head, fighting tears. The crew's loyalty amazed her. They were willing to risk everything, for her. She had never known such courage. Never been worth so much to anyone. That night, Holt found her sitting in her chamber, staring out at the stars. He sat beside her, his voice calm. "You're afraid. I know. But fear is not weakness. Fear means you understand the danger. What matters is what you do in spite of it," Lyra whispered. "What if I am not strong enough?" Holt looked at her steadily. "Then lean on us until you are. That is what it means to have family." The word family struck her deeply. She had never had one. She realized now that perhaps, aboard this ship, she was finding one at last. For the first time since her escape, she smiled fully without fear. "Then I will try," she said. As the ship continued its journey, Lyra walked the halls with a little more confidence. She spoke more freely, laughed softly with the crew, and learned more each day. Her past still haunted her, but it no longer defined her. She was no longer just a slave. She was Lyra, a free woman, and the stars were finally within her reach. But deep in the galaxy, the Empire prepared to strike back. And Lyra knew her greatest test was yet to come. The human ship moved swiftly through the dark void of space, leaving the city of Valon far behind. Yet danger was never far. Messages intercepted from the Empire showed that Lord Vaylor was mobilizing forces. He demanded Lyra's return and threatened war if his orders were not obeyed. Lyra walked the corridors of the ship with her hands clasped behind her back, staring at the glowing panels. She had grown stronger since her escape, but the weight of the Empire's threat pressed heavily on her. Every night she stared at the stars, wondering if she had the courage to face what was coming. Captain Holt noticed her unease. He approached quietly as she stood near the observation window. "Worried?" he asked softly. Lyra nodded. I fear what they might do. I left everything behind, yet they will not let me go." Holt placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "The Empire believes in control, not in right or wrong. We stand for what is right, and we will protect you, Lyra." She took a deep breath, letting his words settle in her heart. The fear was still there, but it was no longer paralyzing. It had become fuel. The first confrontation came quickly. Scouts from the Empire had tracked the human ship and attempted an interception near a dense asteroid field. Alarms blared as the ship's crew took positions. Holt and his officers moved with precision, issuing orders to navigate the field while avoiding collisions. Lyra watched from the observation deck, her heart racing. She had never seen anything like this. Asteroids spinning like giant stones. In space, enemy ships darting through the void, lasers cutting through the darkness. "Lyra," Holt said, drawing her attention, "you know their tactics better than anyone. Tell me what you see." Her eyes widened as she studied the holographic map. "They will try to flank us through the smaller asteroids. The narrow paths are easier for them to hide in, but they will not see us coming from above." Holt nodded. "Good. Alert the crew. We will use this." Her knowledge, once considered useless by her masters, was now vital. She felt a thrill she had never known before, a sense of purpose and value. The battle was tense but brief. Using Lyra's insight, the humans maneuvered through the asteroid field, avoiding ambushes and outsmarting the Empire's scouts. By the end of the skirmish, the enemy was forced to retreat, humiliated and frustrated. Lyra exhaled sharply. "We did it," she whispered. Holt smiled. "Yes, and we will do it again if we must. But remember, it is not just about fighting. It is about hope." The days that followed were filled with preparation. Lyra trained with the crew, learning basic survival and navigation skills. She learned to read star maps, operate communication devices, and understand strategy. Every lesson strengthened her resolve. Yet more important than the skills was the confidence she gained. She had escaped the palace, survived the city, and now stood among humans who valued her as an equal. Slowly, the chains of fear and doubt that had haunted her for years fell away. One evening, Holt called her into the strategy room. Holograms of planets and fleets floated in the air. "Lyra," he said, "your story is powerful. Others need to hear it. Not just as information, but as inspiration." "What do you mean?" she asked cautiously. "You have seen the cruelty of the Empire. You know what it feels like to live as property. If you speak, others may rise. Your voice can change hearts, Lyra." She trembled at the thought. She had never spoken freely in her life. Who would listen? Who would believe her? Holt stepped closer. "Trust me. Speak from your heart. You are no longer just a survivor. You are a beacon." Her throat felt tight, but she nodded. "I will try." The message was sent. Lyra spoke through a secure transmission, addressing oppressed slaves across the Empire. She described her life in the palace, the fear and the hopelessness, but she also spoke of freedom, of the humans who had saved her, and of the courage to fight for oneself. The response was immediate. Hidden networks of slaves began to organize. Merchants, workers, and even some minor nobles started questioning the Empire's strict rules. Across the galaxy, whispers of rebellion began to spread. Lyra watched the responses come in on the ship's communications system. The faces of slaves, their voices filled with hope, appeared on the screen. She felt a warmth she had never known. Her voice mattered. Her story mattered. Holt placed a hand on her shoulder. "See? This is why we fight. Not for conquest, but for hope. You have given them courage, Lyra. You have changed the galaxy, one person at a time. Tears filled her eyes. She had never imagined that she could matter so much. But the Empire did not remain idle. Lord Vaylor sent a fleet, larger and more heavily armed than the scouts they had faced before. The humans prepared for a larger confrontation, and Lyra's knowledge of the Empire's tactics was crucial. As the battle began, Lyra sat at the command console guiding the human ships with precise instructions. Her calm voice directed maneuvers, predicted enemy attacks, and helped the crew respond faster than the Empire could anticipate. The engagement was intense. Ships clashed in bursts of energy, and the void of space became a stage of bravery and determination. Yet the humans and their allies held firm, thanks in large part to Lyra's insight. When the battle ended, the Empire retreated, unable to defeat the unexpected coordination of humans and freed allies. The victory was small in scale but immense in meaning. It proved that freedom could not be silenced. After the battle, Holt stood beside Lyra on the observation deck. The stars shimmered as if celebrating their victory. "You see what you have done?" he asked. Lyra shook her head, overwhelmed. I just told my story. I didn't know it could do all this." Holt smiled. "Your story was truth. Truth always has power. You have inspired more than you realize. You have given hope to those who had none." For the first time, Lyra truly believed it. She had gone from a life of chains to a life of purpose. She had faced fear and uncertainty, and she had risen. The spark inside her had grown into a flame that could not be extinguished. She looked at Holt, gratitude shining in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. Holt placed a hand over hers. "No. Thank you, Lyra. For trusting me. For trusting yourself." As the ship continued its journey through the stars, Lyra knew that the Empire would return, and dangers still awaited. But she no longer feared. She had found strength, courage, and a voice. And with them, she was ready to face whatever came next. The galaxy was beginning to change, and Lyra was at the heart of it. The galaxy was vast and silent, but danger had not vanished. The Empire's retreat after the last battle was temporary. Lord Vaylor still sought to reclaim Lyra, declaring her stolen property across every corner of his realm. Yet the humans, strengthened by allies Lyra had inspired, were ready. Lyra stood on the observation deck of the human ship, her fingers brushing the railing as she gazed at the stars. She remembered the long road that had brought her here, the palace halls, the whispered hope, the first time Captain Holt had spoken to her like a person, not property. She shivered, not from cold, but from the memory of how far she had come. "Thinking again?" Holt's voice came softly behind her. He stood near the window, his eyes calm and steady. Lyra smiled faintly. "Yes, I keep thinking about all the people who are still trapped. So many will never know freedom unless someone shows them the way." Holt nodded. "Then we show them. Together." Her chest swelled. For the first time she felt not fear, but purpose. She had survived, yes, but more than that, she had become a symbol of hope for countless others. The final confrontation came sooner than expected. A fleet of the Empire's ships emerged from hyperspace, more organized and determined than ever. They were prepared for war. The humans had allies of their own, freed slaves, minor noble defectors, and planets inspired by Lyra's message. The stage was set for a decisive battle that would determine the fate of many. Lyra worked alongside the crew, directing ships, predicting enemy tactics, and coordinating defenses. Each command she gave, every insight she offered, made a difference. She had grown from a frightened slave into a capable strategist. Her courage was now as sharp as any weapon. The battle was intense. Lasers streaked across the void, engines burned, and warning alarms screamed through the ships. But Lyra's voice, calm and steady, guided the humans. Holt followed her instructions closely, respecting her instincts as much as his own experience. Hours passed, and the Empire's fleet began to falter. They had underestimated the humans and the power of hope that Lyra had inspired. Slowly, they were forced to retreat, their plans shattered, their control weakened. When the last enemy ship disappeared into the darkness, the humans cheered. Lyra's heart raced, not from relief, but from the realization that her life, and the lives of countless others, had been forever changed. Later, aboard the ship, Lyra finally allowed herself a moment of rest. She walked to the observation deck and saw planets, moons, and stars spread like a map of infinite possibilities. Holt joined her, placing a hand gently over hers. "You did it," he said quietly. "All of this, you played a part in making it possible." Lyra shook her head, her eyes moist. "I couldn't have done it without you, without the humans who showed me kindness." Holt smiled. "No, you showed us all something even greater. Courage, wisdom, strength. You've proven that freedom is worth fighting for." She looked up at him, a sudden warmth filling her chest. She realized then that the bond between them had grown into something deeper than trust or gratitude. It was respect, companionship, and something more. Days later, the humans and their allies gathered on a quiet, unclaimed planet to celebrate their victory. Freed slaves from countless worlds attended, and the air was filled with laughter, music, and hope. For the first time, Lyra experienced a world where she was not defined by chains but by her choices. Holt approached her during the celebration. "Lyra," he said softly, "there is something I want to ask you." Her heart skipped. She looked at him, curiosity and caution mixing together. "I cannot promise you a life without challenges," he continued, "but I can promise you freedom, respect, and partnership. Will you join me? Not as a slave, not as a subject, but as an equal? My wife?" Lyra felt tears fill her eyes. She remembered the years of fear, the long nights of silence, and the weight of chains that had once bound her. And now here was a man offering her choice, equality, and love. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Yes, I will." Holt took her hand, and together they stood before the gathered crowd. It was not a show of power, but a celebration of freedom and partnership. Around them, people cheered, inspired by what Lyra and Holt represented: the triumph of courage, compassion, and human values. In the days that followed, Lyra and Holt worked side by side. She helped organize communities for newly freed individuals, teaching them skills and guiding them toward independence. He supported her, always, respecting her decisions and encouraging her growth. For Lyra, life became more than survival, it became creation. She saw the galaxy not as a prison, but as a canvas, and she was free to paint it with hope, wisdom, and kindness. Together, they visited worlds once oppressed by the Empire. They spoke to leaders, freed slaves, and citizens, spreading the message of freedom and equality. Everywhere they went, Lyra's story inspired change. People who had been silenced found their voices. Systems built on cruelty began to crumble. Through it all, Holt remained her partner, not her master. He never demanded obedience, never treated her as property, and always valued her opinions. In return, Lyra grew confident, strong, and joyful. She had become not just a symbol, but a person living her own story. One evening, they stood together on the observation deck of their ship, gazing at the stars. The galaxy stretched endlessly before them, full of possibility and promise. Lyra leaned her head on Holt's shoulder. "I never imagined a life like this," she said softly, "a life where I am free and loved." Holt kissed her forehead gently. "You always deserved it, Lyra. You just needed to see it for yourself." She smiled, tears of happiness sparkling in her eyes. "I see it now, and I will never forget it." Together they looked out at the stars, not as master and slave, but as partners, equals, and companions. The galaxy was vast, full of challenges and wonders, but Lyra was ready. Free at last, she had chosen her own path, and it was one she would walk with courage, hope, and love. The journey ahead was theirs to shape, and together, they would show the galaxy what true freedom and partnership could achieve.